Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my video today on the Spurs pursuit. I'm your host, Martin Frank, and today we'll be discussing the two different journeys the North London rivals have taken on in recent years. So, as you can tell by the title, 4 years, two strategies, how Tottenham fell behind Arsenal. So, I just want you to picture a lovely, bright, spring afternoon in May. More specifically, the 22nd of May. You've got the summer vibe outside. Tottenham Hotspur have just thrashed Norwich and secured fourth spot because weeks prior to that, they had thrashed Arsenal at home in the North London derby. It was the first victory at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium against the North London rivals. So, psychological advantage, definitely. Champions League football for Tottenham Hotspur, not for Arsenal. So everything looked like the tide had seemingly turned once again to Tottenham's favour. And North London looked to be white for a long time. Tottenham Hotspur's coach Antonio Conte had much more experience than his counterpart Mikel Arteta. And the man who had finally been able to turn Spurs around. Could he deliver the first trophy in 15 years for Tottenham Hotspur? That's what everyone waited to see. Well, we all know how that went with Antonio Conte. But that's not the only factor why Tottenham are so far behind. There are much deeper issues. And so I have decided to fast forward 4 years on from now, pick four specific variables to analyse the two clubs, which are, of course, a fair analysis. And those are average age of players purchased, players on wages above €150,000 per week, the wage bill of players purchased, subtracted by the players sold, and lastly, the money spent. So let's get right into this analysis. Now, first up, we've got the average age of players coming in. So as you can tell by the data, first of all, in the first 2 years, from 2022-2023 transfers, looks very similar between Tottenham Hotspur and Arsenal. Mainly the first year, it was quite high for both teams, scoring an average of 26 of the average age coming in. So if we look at Tottenham's spending, they brought in Ivan Perisic, Fraser Forster as a backup goalkeeper, Richarlison, Bentancur, Longley, and Christian Romero, boosting leadership in the changing room. So as I've already mentioned, Arsenal took on a very, very similar approach. They had brought in experience, including Jorginho, including Gabriel Jesus, Zinchenko, who were Premier League winners with Manchester City. Now, that was all fair and square, and then from 2023, we see a change in the pattern of the graph. You see that from 2023 onwards, Arsenal have always brought in more experienced players to add to their starting 11 or their team overall, if we compare that to Tottenham Hotspur. Now, as summer of 2023 had arrived, Spurs had lost their greatest leader and top scorer in the history of the club in the name of Harry Kane, and replaced him with inexperienced players bar James Maddison. And although Spurs sat top of the Premier League after the first quarter, if you remember the first 10 games of Ange Postecoglou, Tottenham Hotspur, we were all delighted, we were all in dreamland, believing that we had finally struck our man, we had finally struck a team that wants to play for the badge. However, inexperience quickly set in against Chelsea as two players were sent off. And on top of that, two players were injured, leaving the team to be left out to dry. If we pause for a second, that 2023 summer saw Arsenal show their ambition by purchasing Declan Rice for a record fee of €120 million, Kai Havertz for €72 million, and Jurrien Timber for €40 million, while securing David Raya. No Guglielmo Vicario. David Raya for an initial loan fee with an obligation to buy in the summer, which cost them around 30 million, which is around 10 million more than what Tottenham Hotspur spent for Guglielmo Vicario. And if you look at the way Arsenal play out from the back, it's day and night in comparison to Tottenham. So quality over quantity is a saying for a reason. And with Arsenal's ambitious purchases with an average age 2 more than Spurs in that summer, experience continued to show as they finished second once more, with Spurs just missing out on Champions League football. Still in European competitions due to the amazing start of the first 10 games where Spurs found themselves top of the tree. However, then came the massive, massive difference. 2024, Spurs and Arsenal are both in European competitions once again. However, apart from 3 teenagers, Dominic Solanke was the only senior member to be added. And if you remember Harry Kane's departure in 2023, we are now in 2024 and Spurs have finally replaced Harry Kane with Dominic Solanke as a natural striker. That's 1 whole year of Spurs unable to add and replace a Harry Kane. Of course, you cannot replace a Harry Kane man for man, but you can replace him in the position that he had played. And what Tottenham had there was a problem of playing either Heung-min Son or Richarlison in that position. However, both of these two mentioned were already at the club prior to 2023 summer. So that summer of 2024 where Spurs had purchased 3 teenagers and Dominic Solanke is reflected in the average age of players purchased. The only reason it's bumped up to 21 is because Dominic Solanke was 26 when coming to Tottenham. Kevin Danso was not a teenager. And that's about it. Because all the other transfers, including Antonin Kinski, were teenagers at the time of purchase. If you compare that to Arsenal, there is almost a 7-year gap. Arsenal had continued to reinvest in experience, quality, and that is reflected in their league position and their ambitions of their football club, even reaching a semi-final of the Champions League that campaign. So, you would expect Tottenham Hotspur to learn from that mistake. Well, you have to remember Johan Lang is the director of football. What is Johan Lang's primary position? A senior scout. What does a senior scout do? He scouts talent. What does talent mean? It means young players. And that was further reflected in the next summer. And although Spurs did try and show ambition after winning the Europa League by a miracle, the departure of Heung-min Son again shows another leader leaving the club, the captain of the team leaving the club. And with Spurs to only reinvest in an average age of 23.6, including Conor Gallagher, who is 25 years of age, it just further shows the ambitions of the club. What I failed to mention was João Palhinha is in his 30s. That is the only reason it's slightly bumped up. If we were to retract these 2 players, with Palhinha only on loan and Conor Gallagher being bought in the winter, we would be on 21 years of age once again. If you compare that to Arsenal, 26. Again, there is a 3-year age gap. So age reflects not only experience, but also it shows risk, because players not having a large enough portfolio capable of sustaining form on a regular basis. It's been proved in Tottenham's case, with players like Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall struggling for form in the long term, in comparison to players being purchased like a Declan Rice, a Jurriën Timber, or a Martin Zubimendi. You have to spend in order to bring in quality. And when you want to bring in quality, you have to bring in certain players of a certain age who are performing at the peak of their footballing ability, who have the experience at the top level. That was not shown by Tottenham Hotspur. Moving on to number 2, and that's the overall wage bill of Tottenham Hotspur in comparison to Arsenal. Now, this wage bill conducted takes into account players sold as well, which accounts for net spend on wages per week instead of focusing on just the incoming contracts to show the full story. Let me explain. For example, if a player is sold earning 100,000 a week, and then a player is purchased who signs a contract where he'll be earning 100,000 a week, the net spend will be zero. Okay, so I hope that's clear enough. So, as expected, in the summer of 2022, Tottenham Hotspur had secured Champions League football ahead of Arsenal, meaning you have to attract certain players. You will attract certain players due to Champions League football. However, it was only around 100,000 per week more. Okay, that is not too much. And if we take into account the ratio of players earning more than 150,000 coming in, it's a ratio of 1-to-1 because Gabriel Jesus coming in and also Ivan Perisic coming in. All other players purchased by Tottenham and Arsenal were earning less than 150,000 per week. Okay, now 2023 shows a different story. If you can see, Arsenal absolutely dominate this statistic from 2023 onwards. One reason is that they have secured Champions League football. However, you can see that now the gap is around 200,000 ahead of Tottenham. Okay, moving onwards, you see a massive contrast there. Now, the reason Tottenham Hotspurs is so low is because, as already mentioned, the star man, one of the best players in the world, Harry Kane, whom was earning around 230,000 per week, is no longer at your club. And although you have purchased in total 4 more players than Arsenal, you have still not managed to show ambition. Because if you are purchasing 4 more players ahead of your rivals and you do not have Champions League football, the wage bill of players coming in should be something similar to Arsenal if you want to compete at the top level. We have heard from the board on a regular basis that they are fighting, they are doing everything possible to put Spurs where they should be, and that is competing for Champions League spots, for Premier League titles. We heard Daniel Levy said that the summer he was sacked, which was last summer. If we look at statistics and data, it's just a load of nonsense and lies that we are being served. So during that summer of 2023, the reason being that it's almost double Tottenham's for Arsenal is because they had purchased Declan Rice, Jurgen Timber, as we've already mentioned, when focusing on average age. However, that's also been reflected in the wages they've been offered. If you bring in somebody that is earning a large amount of money, it's because they most likely do their job properly and to a very, very high standard. If you are bringing players who are not earning such money, they are either inexperienced, young, or they lack quality. Now, the turn of the tide 2025, you see a massive, massive contrast there. Absolutely gigantic. So not only is 2024 also more than double, 2025 is almost quadruple the wage bill of Arsenal's. And taking into consideration that Tottenham Hotspur no longer had on their books Tanguy and Ndombele, earning around 200,000 a week. They no longer had Heung-min Son, earning around 230,000 per week. Tottenham Hotspur have yet again failed to show ambition, and Arsenal have completely put their standpoint. And although they are the main rivals of our football club, we have to give credit where credit is due, and that is in the ownership and the board. Because the wages show something deeper. Now, I will leave this graphic on, but I will come on to my point, which is number 3, and that is players earning more than 100,000 per week. Now, starting off the journey in 2022, we can calculate 5 players who are on more than 150,000 per week. Some of them are ending their peak at top European leagues. Some are one of the best players in the world. So let's mention them. Tanguy and Ndombele, Ivan Perisic, Harry Kane, Hugo Lloris, and Heung-min Son. These were the only 5 players earning more than 150,000 per week at Tottenham. That was still less than Arsenal's, which was Martin Odegaard, Gabriel Jesus, Jorginho, Raheem Sterling, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, and Alexandre Lacazette. So that is still 2 more players less coming in from 22 to 23 than Tottenham Hotspur. The team who had Champions League football that year. The team who had just missed out on European places due to Antonio Conte's attics and the absolute mess of a coaching situation that was left at Tottenham, which saw 3 different managers during that season. To add, Arsenal have lost the latter 4 I have mentioned, but another variable that comes into account is offering new contracts. If you are performing well, you will be rewarded. How has that shown at Arsenal? Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Magalhaes, William Saliba, David Raya, and Ben White all rewarded new contracts during the space of these 4 years, all making them earners of more than 150,000 per week. If we look at Tottenham Hotspur's numbers, it is only Romero who has secured a pay rise in that category. And with new contracts for example, the likes of Rodrigo Bentancur and Jed Spence, it is way below Arsenal's pay. So if you are not able to provide contracts in that sum of money, it signals one of 2 things. A, your players are not playing to the required standard of you offering such a contract. B, you are not looking at players available that are earning such a contract already at a different club. And C, you are unwilling to pay such money and offer such contracts. In my opinion, it is A, B, and C which are correct in Tottenham's case. And that sets you light years behind opposition that are fighting for Champions League and Premier League titles. Because if you are unable to have a squad that is earning high amounts of money, you then have a squad who are not capable of producing top performances because they are not top players. There is no 2 ways about it. If you look at the wage bills of Manchester City, of Liverpool, of Arsenal, of Chelsea, where are they in terms of squad in comparison to Tottenham? They are miles ahead. And although Spurs always have some form of superstar on their hands, arguably now is the time where Tottenham do not have a single superstar on their hands. The team around these superstars has always been bang average, which is reflected by the wage bill. Now, lastly, let's focus on the money spent. And here you see that the graph is actually either even or in Tottenham's favour. Okay, in that sense of if we do the maths overall. Let me explain this final category. The analysis does not take into consideration players sold or left, as was the case in point 2. The reason being is that the wage structure is not the same as net spend overall, because net spend does not always reflect ambitions of a football club, like Tottenham Hotspur. For example, Tottenham Hotspur can spend more money, however they do not have to invest in the present. They can invest like a stock, like an ETF for the long-term process. They do not have to be investing in something that improves your team straight away, like wages do. So even if such a consideration was put to place, let me mention this, Arsenal still are the larger spenders because Tottenham Hotspur having a lower net spend further shows their lack of ambition. Tottenham Hotspur have sold players for higher money overall than Arsenal have. Arsenal's record sale is around the sum of 40 million, if I'm not mistaken. Tottenham Hotspur have sold Gareth Bale, Luka Modric, Harry Kane for incredible sums of money. So that just shows you again the situation Tottenham Hotspur find themselves in. Right, although Spurs had 2 years of higher expenditure, 2023 proved to be due to Harry Kane's departure, which was very similar to Gareth Bale's departure, where Tottenham Hotspur went on to reinvest into the squad, which they had neglected to do for previous years. And with the money installed by a club like a Bayern Munich or a Real Madrid, 100 million injection was able to be spent on reinvestment that the club should have been spending years prior, which again shows how far behind Tottenham Hotspur already were. The money spent in 2023 should have been spent in 2020. It just further proves the reality of the situation for Tottenham. So as you can see, Tottenham Hotspur are spending. They are just spending incorrectly. They are spending not for the present. They are spending for the future. So let's get some results overall. Let me explain the results. So 4 years ago, as we've already mentioned, Tottenham Hotspur stood on the brink of something significant. Champions League qualification secured, Arsenal beaten decisively at home, Antonio Conte demanding ambition, demanding pressure on the board, and the infrastructure was there. An elite European powerhouse firmly in place, one of the best stadiums in the world, one of the best training centres in the world. The trajectory was there in place. The foundations were there in place for the trajectory to be upward. However, if you do not invest correctly, you will push everything backwards. So when analysing these four key variables, a consistent pattern emerges throughout these four. A lack of investment into the present, which shows the two different paths taken. One of them treats their club as a business. The other treats their club as a business, however, trying to get revenue through winning things and securing Champions League qualification on a regular basis and trying to fight for the Premier Leagues and Champions Leagues. There is a massive difference between running your club as a business and running your club as a football club trying to be a business. There is a massive difference between these two. And ultimately, Spurs have adopted a different strategy as Arsenal did in 2022, where the level of squad, the level of manager was similar. However, Tottenham Hotspur, as I've already mentioned, had the foundations set way light years ahead of Arsenal. Light years ahead. P-Cage, ready-made internationals, that's what Arsenal invested in. That raises both quality and wage structure in line with competitive ambition. Simple. It is as simple as that. And of course, I am saying nothing new. However, it's very refreshing to see statistics be put in front of you as well instead of just opinions. So Tottenham changed their recruitment strategy to focus more on young players, which we have of course seen. Ange Postecoglou, after coming on the podcast with Gary Neville, publicly said that. So it's no secret. The head coaches can see it. Igor Tudor can see such problems right now. Thomas Frank probably saw such problems in the present. However, he was a yes man. He didn't want to lose his job, so he remained quiet. So the average age declined dramatically from the year 2023. Growth in wages had stalled, and the high earners of Tottenham had left without finding suitable replacements to come in. So the club consistently put long-term viability and possible resale value ahead of short-term competitive advantage. It's as simple as that. So it's not just age alone. It's not just spending. It's the issue of alignment. It's putting things together. It's like the current situation of Tottenham Hotspur right now when trying to build a starting 11 with the injuries. It's alignment. It's not just one player being played out of position. It's suddenly three. It's suddenly four. It's suddenly a mixture of this cohesion that leads to a spiral of poor results, of dissatisfaction from fans, of players, of coaching staff. It's as simple as that. And the result is so visible today. One club operating at the summit of the Premier League, sitting top of the tree, whilst the other is scrambling for safety before relegation. Unable to win in almost 3 months of Premier League football. So Tottenham Hotspur still, to this day, have the foundations in place. They have world-class facilities which should be attracting top players. They have global stature. They have commercial strength. Yet, with the ruling hand of the Lewis family, it's the famous words of Mauricio Pochettino and Antonio Conte that can still be put in place now. And I will focus on the quote of Mauricio Pochettino. When you talk about Spurs, everyone says you have an amazing house, but you need to put in the furniture. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the analysis. See you later.